Hi, hello, hola, what's up? And welcome to the Hope Chase podcast. I'm Angie and I am your host. Welcome to the Shit Show. Episode number 1. Woohoo! First episode is going into the books. Hopefully, many more to come. So grab your popcorn, your coffee, your tea, or whatever else for the next half an hour or so, because we're going to discuss the topic of rock bottoms. So before I get into it, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for listening. This is episode number 1, and I want to just share with you some ideas that I have on how this is going to be formatted. Until I get more comfy down the road, I'd like to have some guests on. So each episode will have a different topic. And each episode, I am going to pose a question of the day. And for the remaining part of the episode, I am going to discuss my perspective on whatever the question is. I'm going to answer it from my point of view. So today's topic, is about rock bottoms. And do you think that it's necessary to hit a certain low, to go through a certain threshold of lowness, if you will, in order to experience a rock bottom moment, a moment of clarity? And do you think it's necessary to have that moment of clarity, that aha moment, in order to go on into successful recovery, long-term recovery? Do you think it's necessary? What does rock bottom mean? Rock bottom does not necessarily mean consequences. Two different things. Rock bottom to me means that moment of clarity that a person has. That moment where a clear thought enters your brain that you have to change your life and you have to do something differently, right? So rock bottom is not synonymous with certain consequences. Just because you've hit a low doesn't necessarily mean you've had that moment of clarity. And trust me, my story can attest to that. Now, a perfect situation that comes to mind is court-mandated treatment. That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's a perfect example. You're being forced into detox. You're being forced into recovery by an outside source. Chances are you're not having a moment of clarity. You're doing it to stay out of jail or whatever the case may be. It never worked for me. I always ended up getting high and going to jail. But I mean, it's a perfect example. Is it possible to have long-term successful recovery? Now, when I say that, I mean like really, really doing the work, really, really healing yourself and doing all the things to heal from your addiction. I don't know, something to think about. So in answering this question and giving my perspective, I think about my own experience. And, I almost forgot. When I share my story, I literally forget sometimes that I was that person. I was that person early in my addiction journey. I was that person with no consequences going to AA in quote unquote recovery, because I wasn't really doing any work. I was just going to meetings, meeting a lot of great people, speaking, standing at the podium. I even got my year chip. But I had zero consequences. I was in grad school Everything on the outside was the exact same. I had been going to meetings and in recovery, quote unquote, from cocaine at the time. I hadn't even touched heroin yet. It was about a year, for the year and a half, 18 months, I went to meetings before I picked up heroin for the first time. And I always had one foot out the door. I always knew that I wasn't done yet. I forget that I'm a fucking therapist. I forget that I went to grad school and I do hold a master's degree. And I did get licensed as a clinical therapist, although I did go on to lose that license due to my criminal record and my criminal activity, because come to find out, they don't allow you to practice therapy if you have like open felonies and shit. I mean, who'd have thought? Go figure. And I've heard a lot of stories. I've heard a lot of stories from different people in AA, from being a therapist, and I've heard a lot of different rock bottoms. Now, when I was that person that didn't have any consequences, my bottom at that time was on a Christmas day, and I had gotten completely drunk at dinner and lied to my parents about going to visit a friend, told them I was going to be at someone's house that I really wasn't going to be at, so that I could go to another person's house and get high on coke and drink some more. And that friend that I wanted to cover for me ended up telling my mom where I was really at. My mom lost her shit, threatened to call the cops, the whole 9 yards. So I went home, and that was the last day that I used cocaine. And I would continue to go to meetings for the next 18 months or so while I was in grad school. Grad school during the day, sometimes I go to a meeting, noontime meeting at BU. I went to Boston University. And then at night, I'd meet up with my friends, and we'd go to young people's meetings in Boston. The AA community is second to none. It's amazing. And I loved being a part of that community. And at that time, I wasn't getting clean because I had an aha moment or rock bottom moment. I was doing it just because I kind of thought that's what I had to do to, get my mom off my back or to calm things down. I just was kind of going through the motions. And I would hear other people's stories about getting arrested and the things that they did to continue to get high and the things and the places that they ended up. And I would think, holy shit. But they're great people. The people that I met in those meetings, the people that I met there are some of the best people that I've ever known in my life, which was kind of contradictory, right? That's like a weird, oh, this person robbed a bank, but he's like the best guy that I know. But eventually, my attendance at meetings started to dwindle, and I started to spend more time alone and in my own head and entertain the thoughts of using again. I remember I would hear these stories, these dope stories from all these ex-junkies, and I would literally think that I wanted to try heroin. I was curious, right? I never actually thought that I would ever use a needle. And I remember when I found out that you could sniff dope, I was like, oh, really? I didn't know that. Oh, well, in that case, let me try it. As if it was any better than using a needle. And so my 1 foot out the door started to get a little more out the door. Then it became a whole leg out the door of AA, and then half my body out the door. And sooner or later, I relapsed with a bottle of wine, even though booze has never really been my thing. It was like a rebellion, act of rebellion. I'm going to go get a bottle of wine, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And that's what I did. Ended up getting some Coke, and that's what started this lovely addiction journey that became my heroin addiction. A few months after that, I would try heroin for the first time, and it went all downhill from there. So that was my first experience with recovery. I really wasn't doing it for myself. I was just kind of going through the motions. I definitely did not have any kind of rock bottom that shook me into getting clean. And it didn't last. And I knew it wasn't going to last. And in the addiction community, it's kind of funny because everybody's rock bottom, it's like these badges that people wear, right? Well, you've gone to jail 57 times. Well, listen to my story. You think that's bad? Listen to my story. Well, I almost lost my arm. Well, I ended up in a high-speed chase on the highway with the cops. Oh, well, you think that's bad? Listen to this. You know, the war stories. Nobody's better or worse in the addiction community just because they experienced more consequences. It just means you're an idiot. I'm an idiot for having to experience all that shit. So now I want to get into a little more detail about my actual bottom, because I can sit here and tell you I've been to jail. I think it's 5 times. Honestly, I don't know. 4 or 5 maybe. And I have over a 10-page record, criminal record. And I've overdosed. Honestly, I don't know the number. It might be 4 or 5, similar to the jail visits, I think. And hospitalizations, I can't tell you the number, but I've almost lost my right foot, my left leg, and my left arm directly due to addiction and injecting things. Even though I have experienced all those different consequences and those bad things were happening, I never had that aha moment. And that's why there's such a difference between rock bottom and consequences, because I've been to jail numerous times, had numerous overdoses, like all the things that I've said I've experienced, but I never had that moment of clarity. I never had that, oh shit, Ange, it's time. It's time to really get your shit together. I never had that moment throughout any of those consequences. I just thought it was part of what I needed to experience. I wanted to be a dope fiend, so I needed to check all the boxes. So my rock bottom, ironically enough, happened after I stopped using dope. My actual holy fuck, Ange, you need to change happened after I stopped using. And it was, my dad had just died in September 2019. And I had been up in the States in Connecticut where my parents lived. First thing I did when I got off the plane in Boston was get high. It's what I went back to. It's always what I went back to. And my dad had just died. Eventually, I had to come back to Mexico. All my shit was here. My life was here. I didn't have anything in the States anymore. I had nothing. And I had to come back. Somebody graciously paid for my flight to come back to Mexico so I could, quote unquote, return to my life. And on November 9th, when I caught that flight, 2019 was the last day I used dope. At whatever o'clock it was in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning. using as much as I could. And at that moment, I really didn't think it was my last time. I mean, that's what I said. I just knew I was going back to Mexico. I'd had to kick dope again for the next couple days, which sucked. It just became a normal thing to me. Oh, gotta kick dope again. No big deal. So that was the last time I used heroin, November 9th, 2019. And I would come back to Mexico and come back to my life here and pretty much pick up where I left off. There's a different environment, good old geographical cure. Got back to my life, kind of just went along like really nothing was happening. And 3 weeks after I returned on that 9th of November, beginning of December, my mom died. I remember standing there. I got a text message from my brother saying that she passed away the day before, and then he blocked me. So I had no idea how, when, why, nothing. And in that moment, I had nobody to call. I had nobody to contact. My dad was my rock. He would have been the one I called, but he just died. And then after that, my mom would have been the one to call. She just died. I didn't have any friends, nobody close enough, anyways, to call and cry to. So I just stood there like, okay. And I did what I knew how to do. I just continued with life as if nothing was happening. I continued to go out, socialize with my friends, even though I felt so heavy. And then 2 months later, quarantine hit. And I couldn't keep busy anymore. I couldn't do things to keep my brain busy. My apartment at the time was filthy. I was still living a dope fiend lifestyle, even though I wasn't using dope. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't showering. Fuck, I couldn't even bring myself to take a shower. My apartment was a mess. There was garbage everywhere. My clothes were all over the floor. No TV, no food. It was a mess. And quarantine expected me to sit in that place and not go anywhere, not do anything. That was a disaster. That was not going to happen. And I had to look for a new place because I couldn't pay the rent there anymore because my world was crumbling down around me. My parents had just died. I lost any and all security that I had ever had in my life. My dad was paying for my life. He was supporting me in every way, paying for the roof over my head, paying for my life, giving me cash to live off of. And I was also selling drugs. I started selling drugs in Mexico about 2 months after being here, of course, because it was what I knew how to do, right? And I'll save that story for a different episode. But I was selling drugs, and I was still involved in that drug street life. So I was making money, and all that stopped. I had nothing. And I remember just before quarantine hit in February of 2020, getting arrested down here by the Marines. And I'll tell you that story in a different episode, but I've been arrested twice, 2 or 3 times. Goodness gracious, Ange, where does it end? And I had to spend the weekend in a jail in Cancun, which was fun. Just another box I checked, you know? I thought to myself when I was sitting in handcuffs in the back of that car, or a truck, mind you, one of my first thoughts was, I'm actually glad my parents are not around to hear about this. I was so happy I didn't have to make that phone call when I got arrested. And then quarantine continued to get worse. Everything shut down. And I was sitting there, just me, myself, and I. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. And the depression kept getting worse and worse and worse. I couldn't leave the house. I had so much anxiety. I remember I would even, let's say, go to the grocery store right down the street, a couple blocks away, and I would go to leave my house. I'd stand at the front door and I'd look outside. And if there was anybody standing outside that I had to pass, I would stand there and wait until there was nobody in the street. And if I saw somebody that I knew while walking down the street, I would literally turn around and go in the other direction. I had so much. Now, I know now why I did that. I know today that I did that because of the shame that I was feeling. I didn't know why for the longest time, but I finally figured it out over the last year of my healing journey, my recovery. It was all the shame I was feeling. I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't be seen. And so I just stopped leaving the house. I would just stay home, do nothing, wouldn't even get dressed at times, wouldn't even get out of bed. And at the time I was in an abusive living situation, which I'll get more into in a different episode. So many different layers, right? It was like the perfect storm in my life. It was the perfect storm for, God, misery. Perfect storm for a rock bottom, right? The universe was like, oh, you don't think it got bad enough? Well, here, try to deal with this. And I was suicidal. I was waking up every day crying because I didn't want to wake up. I was Googling ways to end my life because I didn't see any way out. And again, I didn't have any heroin to use. Where I'm at in Mexico, there's no heroin allowed on the island. And even in other parts of Mexico, you can't really find it. You know, Mexicans really aren't dope fiends. There's no dope fiends in Mexico. There really isn't. And so I had to sit there with no substances that made me feel better, nowhere to escape to. And that lasted for about a year and a half. I kept getting kicked out of apartments, so I had to move like 8 or 9 times within that quarantine period. It was like a year, right? That everything was like shut down and shit. So I kept having to move. And all the while, I still wasn't taking care of myself. My apartment was still a mess. I still wasn't taking care of my body. I wasn't showering. I wasn't eating correctly. I was sleeping. I was sleeping a lot. But I wasn't taking care of myself. And about a year and a half of this into 2021, and I was just increasingly bad. I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought that I was agoraphobic for a while. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? I went from being social Sally out all the time, which is actually rare for me because I'm a homebody. I'm a home person. But I thought there was something wrong with me because I had been going out. I had been social Sally. I was dealing drugs. Everybody knew who I was. I was popular. Just because I sold drugs. I mean, I didn't have any friends. But all of a sudden, I could rarely leave my house. I didn't want to do anything. And I literally always thought in the back of my mind that one day I was just going to wake up and feel better and snap out of it and be back to social Sally. But it never was happening. It wasn't happening. And I was like, what the fuck? And then I remember like it was yesterday, this thought that I had in the beginning of summer 2021. And I was sitting in my bed, and I remember thinking about how miserable I was. And I had been incredibly suicidal and depressed and anxious. And I was sitting in my bed and I thought, holy shit, I don't have to feel this way. I mean, if I'm going to have to live the rest of my life, it's going to suck if I'm miserable for the rest of my life. It's going to suck. Like, this sucks, right? And I had this moment of clarity where it was like, I don't have to be miserable. I don't have to be miserable. It's been like a year, over a year since my parents died. Any grief or depression that I'm feeling, I'm choosing to feel. I can snap out of it if I wanted to. I can choose to feel something else. I don't have to be miserable. And it was in that moment where I was like, holy shit. I can choose to feel something else. I don't have to suffer through every single day. I was choosing to suffer. I was waking up every morning and choosing to suffer through each day rather than choosing to try to feel something else, something better. And that was the moment that started this healing and recovery journey that I am on. And it's been over a year and a half now. But that was the moment, my rock bottom moment that happened a year after putting the dope down. So with all that said, and my rock bottom experience, I say I am grateful for it all because I obviously experienced what I had to experience in order to get that moment of clarity. Everybody's different because when I think on it, I really don't think I could have successfully entered any kind of healing journey or recovery journey if my dad was alive or if I didn't lose everything, right? I don't think I could have had that moment of clarity without that because I had to be stripped of it. I was spoiled. I was a spoiled brat. I had been enabled for years. My life was paid for. I had always dreamed of when I could live by myself and support myself, live independently. That was a goal, a dream of mine. I used to say it all the time. I used to say, I cannot wait until I don't have to rely on anybody else. I cannot wait until I don't have to ask my dad for money. I cannot wait until I can live independently. I used to say it all the fucking time. And I forgot about that. I had a conversation with somebody where I was like, I had just gotten India, my puppy child. She was a few months old. And I had a moment where I was like, holy shit, I can't believe like I'm living on an island in Mexico and I have a puppy and I'm just like functioning. And this person looked at me and goes, Ange, it's called living. You're living. And I was like, oh my God, I'm actually living, not just surviving, not just trying to get through each minute of each day, not just trying to hustle through each day, that mindless chase of nothingness. I'm actually fucking living. It's wild. It's a wild thing to actually realize. And I'm living independently and I'm taking care of a puppy. Well, she's not a puppy anymore, but I have a puppy child. I am a mom. I am taking care of another living thing successfully, mind you, which is huge. Now I understand why they say get a plant in early recovery, because it really is second to none. It really is an experience of a lifetime to take care of another living thing, or be responsible for taking care of another living thing. I have a routine. I'm an introvert. I'm a homebody. I don't have any friends. I have no friends. People don't believe me. Like, I say it all the time, but do you really believe me when I say that? Because I really don't talk to any other humans. I really don't. I don't. I'm not exaggerating. And I only talk to my dog, which is fine. And I couldn't be happier. You know, I'm single, which is fine. I've never relied on love. Love is never really, I don't crave that connection like some people do. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess it would be great, but it's not something that I think about ever, ever, ever. And I'm content. I'm fulfilled. I'm fine. I'm good. Not fine. We all know what fine means. I'm good. And you know what was funny is I had to practice different language, right? People ask you all the time, like, oh, hey, how are you? How are you? How are you? How you doing? I'm good. My answer to that question used to always be, I'm all right. I could complain, but I'm not gonna. I'm okay. I started saying, I'm good. I'm really good. That felt so weird. It felt weird to say. And it almost feels like I'm bragging when I do say it, because I'm good. I have a shit ton of reasons to not be good. I could not be good. I could still be miserable if I wanted to, but I'm not. So, in my probably unpopular opinion, I really do think that a moment of clarity, a rock bottom moment, is necessary in order to have long-term successful recovery. And I'm talking about, like, really heal yourself, do all the work, all the things. I think it is necessary. I don't think it's necessary to have all the consequences. But in AA, sometimes they say fake it till you make it. They say just show up. All you got to do is show up. And your brain will catch up to your body. And I wonder if that's even possible. Can you really do that? Like I mentioned in mandated treatment. Can you be forced to get clean and then eventually have an aha moment? I don't know. It never worked for me. So with that, I'll ask the question again. Do you think it's possible to have an aha, what the fuck moment of clarity, rock bottom moment, without experiencing certain lows or losses? Do you think long-term successful recovery is possible without having that moment of clarity? I don't know. Everybody's different. But I'm curious to know what you think. And that's all. That's it. That's all I have to say. That's all, folks. Episode 1 officially down in the books. Check that box. I hope you enjoyed listening. I sincerely hope this does well. I hope it's received well. If there is anything that you want to hear about, any questions, get in touch with me on social media at the Hope Chase Pod on Instagram and TikTok. Also follow this podcast. Get updated and notifications every Tuesday, new episodes drop. So once again, thank you so much for listening to the first episode of the Hope Chase podcast. I'm Angie, and welcome to the Shit Show. See you next time.